as you heard, has many years of experience professionally speaking, right? Is, based on the research I did, is a sort of a marketing guru. She's taken fairly traditional companies like Tata Communications, right? And now, working at a fintech company where it's not just about the disruptive technology and the art of change, that the company brings, but also how she's transforming lives, through her passion for social responsibility and women in the workplace. So maybe, Smitha, we can start with you and keep this momentum going. What about this journey of yours you'd like to share with us, and that would make it a lesson learned for others behind you?
Sure, thank you. And I feel honored to be given the first chance with such a wonderful group over here. I also have to say this is my sort of first conference where I'm seeing all women over here. So it's really, really inspiring to see all of you and some of the conversations that I've had in the morning, from Dr. Sienna Lee, from, Myra, what she talked about earlier, something that I truly believe in. So I'll sort of talk about why I agreed to come in for this conference and sort of speak over here when traditionally I go for all the conferences where we're talking about AI, digital transformation, how CMOs can, become the next C-suite superhero. So that's my next sort of blog article that's going to come out. So please watch out and give me all the likes over there. But when I sort of was looking at the content, something that really struck me was, hey, sponsorship and mentoring is something I feel very passionate about. And that's what I would like to share, sort of my journey, where I made the conscious decision to go and get a coach, go and get a mentor and sponsor within the workplace, whereas outside of the workplace. But let's take a step back. All of us, we have a specific career development journey. And our experiences are not dependent on sort of what gender we belong to. I know there's a lot of conversation going on and research going on around women, whether should they be aggressive or should they sort of hone more of their feminine skills and how they're sort of stereotyped. There's also research that has been done that, what is called a stereotype threat. Most of the times when we're in school, colleges, or in organizations, when the moment you know that there is a threat based on your gender or your race, what culture you come from, immediately you take a step back and you underperform, you conform to those stereotypes as well. So it's quite fascinating to see that, yes, some of the women, we meet, they have ambitious plans. They may not necessarily be shy or introvert, but there's something that's holding them back because they don't want to conform to that stereotype. That's one. Second, again, sort of continuing from what, was, I think, in summary from the last conversation as well, you have to own your own career development journey. The onus lies on you. Yes, the organization can do it, but you need to know where you want to get to, and then rest can be figured out. And that's where the role of a coach, a mentor, and a sponsor comes in. And I know we'll talk further about it in this panel. But in summary, a coach is somebody who's talking to you. Somebody, you could be talking to over the phone or meeting on a bi-weekly basis, spending an hour, like an Olympics coach, where he or she is monitoring every move of yours. You have the trust with them where you can discuss about every situation, and they can analyze and tell you how you could have done differently, how you could have done better. A mentor is somebody who talks with you. These are the people where, like Sienna said earlier, you may have 80% of the things, but 20% of the things you have to absorb as a sponge. So you might have identified someone, or if you haven't identified someone within the organization or outside of the organization who would be able to help you hone your skills in those areas that you want to further develop. It could be interpersonal skills, it could be functional skills, or if your ambition is to become from a CMO to a CEO, what is required in terms of bridging the gap over there. They are constantly working towards developing your skills with you. Whereas a sponsor, this is a very interesting relationship, and not many of us really make that sort of active, I would say, decision or effort to go and get a sponsor. Sponsor is someone who advocates for you and sort of is your champion internally, or if there is no opportunity internally, they even sort of go ahead and talk about you externally. They may not be meeting you very often, but they are able to spot where you want to get to, and they will give you sort of stretch assignments that you can take in as well. Just to conclude, because I know other panelists would love to share their views as well, it has been observed that 23% of people, irrespective whether they're women or men, they have cited in their experiences when they have a sponsor, they advance their career much faster than people who do not have sponsors. And within that, 44% of women, when they had a sponsor, they asked for stretched assignments. They asked for sort of projects that would help them demonstrate their other skill sets which were not observed in their current roles. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon.
Go ahead. Let me do justice to your introduction. So, Rhonda is one of those unique people that you meet, and why I choose to network, right? To get inspired. We had a lot of conversation about the intent for networking. For me, it's the conversation and it's about ideas, whether it's stock tips from friends or people that you meet at a bar, or inspirations like, Rhonda, where you have a purpose in life, and then you know that there is a means to get to that purpose. And that's kind of the career graph or the professional graph that Rhonda has. So maybe, Rhonda, I would ask you to opine a little bit or describe a little bit about how you came to found ohmyhome.com.
Definitely. Your Jesh is very, very kind. I think sometimes in life when we talked about the networking question just now, I thought, well, sometimes you don't have to be deliberate. When I met Yogesh, I thought, oh, there's so much to learn from him. In terms of my own journey to Oh My Home, it's really relevant to this topic, and this is why I'm really glad to be able to share, and hopefully you'll find it useful for yourself. The journey starts from parenting. So I have very inspiring parents, and they were very, very poor when we were young. I've watched them work their way up, and so as my core mentors growing up, they have taught me one very important thing. With the right values, with hard work, things can be possible. And so I think that encourages all of us, encourages myself also to be a good mom, because that can go a very, very long way in solidifying our core values in my company at Oh My Home today. So we firmly believe in my role as a CEO is to take care of my people. I take care of my teammates, especially the ones who have been with me when the company was nothing. We're a very young company. We came out with an idea, and we just go all out to say, you know what? We're going to provide better quality services to the real estate industry. We're going to make it really affordable so that everyone, not just rich people, can afford it and can have access to us. So I make sure that if I take care of my people, the people who've been with us, we keep our promises, they will take care of our customers. They will use sincerity, they will be genuine, and they actually care, and not just because they want to retain their jobs. So this is the core values that I've grown up with, and that has led to the values that we set in my company. And that started with the mentorship in terms of my parents, but that's a personal one. In terms of the business side of mentors, I've also deliberately seek out people that I find are very successful in their area of work, but also are good people. So I don't like to learn from people who are very successful in their work, but I don't find them very ethical. I don't find that they're good to people, including their competitors. I think there's a lot of respect for people who are able to be friends and have common understanding even with the similar industry players. I realize that a lot of times we like to connect with people who understand us, who knows our problems, and who can say, yes, I get it. But I think you might find it a lot more useful finding mentors who are more frank, who are more direct in even criticizing you and telling you that, you know what, this is not going right. You don't know what you're doing. Now here's the way to go. I find that a lot more useful for me. I realize that I grow a lot faster with such mentors rather than the mentors who just say, yeah, I get it, you know. So that's my side for the business mentor. For sponsors, as Smita have mentioned, I don't really have someone like that. But as a startup company, 2 years ago, our sponsors are investors. It has been very difficult when we were younger to get investors, because who wants to put money with someone who just has an idea? But hard work goes a long way. You keep trying, you keep trying, and you keep trying. And those people who say no, you just tell yourself, it's okay, one day I'm coming back and you'll say yes. You know, so you just keep going, you know, don't collect the hatred, and someday the sponsors will come. And that's how we have our group of very supportive investors today.
That's great. Moving right along, Quest has done a great job of assembling this panel, because I've got 2 people from the real estate industry, 2 people from financial services, fintech, 2 people who've gone to the same university, University of Michigan. A shout out for those who in the audience might be from there. So Monique is also from the real estate business. She grew up through the JLL organization, and then convinced them that Philippines is where they need to enter and gain some market share. And so that bet that she took on herself, JLL took on and has been very successful in the Philippines. Since then, she's of course moved from strength to strength and now has her own business. And like you know, the MC said, right, is clearly a subject matter expert. And if you ever go to YouTube and punch her name in, there's a whole lot of videos that pop up. So she's well-spoken, and so maybe, Monique, you can describe for us, contrasting the early stages of a real estate business that Rhonda talked about. How has it been for you, you know, where you are today?
Thank you very much, your guest. And good afternoon to everyone. I'd like to read a note from the Nobel Prize awardee for Peace, Desmond Tutu. He once said, "I know I depend on others, and when I stand out in a crowd, it is always only because I am carried on the shoulders of others." Our topic today is about mentorship and sponsorship. All throughout my life, I have been very deliberate in identifying mentors who can help me navigate through life, navigate through the workplace, and help me advance in my career. I have a cache of mentors. These are very strong women, very successful in their own careers, and they are very diverse as well in terms of where they stand, their age, and their profession. And in some aspects, I find that they know me more than I know myself. But in most cases, I also need them to ground me. So mentors are everywhere. You just have to look and ask. And I have never been afraid to ask for help. And the reason for that is because I never considered asking for help as a sign of weakness. Now, as I advance in age and in experience, I have also gotten over the fear of being judged for what I say. I used to always hear the saying, "When in doubt, do not speak up." And a Chinese belief that the most quiet in the room is actually the most powerful. So I thought to myself, if nobody speaks up, then how will I know that there is a problem brewing? In my previous employment in the Philippines, I have witnessed resignations where reasons I thought could have been addressed immediately if only management knew about it. But because the fear of being judged is so great, the conversation ends, and the cycle repeats itself, and the problem is never solved. So when I transitioned from being an entrepreneur, from being an employee to an entrepreneur, I made sure that we have a very strong mentorship program, both informal and institutional. So as a business owner, I do spend a lot of time in mentorship. I encourage our staff to speak up by telling them that I do not have the monopoly of ideas, that my ideas are not always great, that they are not always implementable, and that they are always not profitable. because I was desperate for a two-way conversation. I needed to let them know that I am also human and that I am not a superwoman. So I needed to eliminate the fear and build their confidence. Now, what about sponsorship? Admittedly, when I was presented the topic, I had to look at the definition, and I was relieved to discover that among the Philippine power women that I spoke to, not a lot of them actually knew what that meant as well. Knowing the definition now, I realized that I have been sponsored as well. And unlike mentors, sponsors choose you. So as a senior research manager in Jones Lang LaSalle in Hong Kong, in charge of the Philippine consultancy, I actually delegated upwards. I spoke to my boss and I said, you should bring this report that we did on the Philippines and convince and advocate the opening of the Philippine office, because I felt so strongly that it was time to open the Philippine office. 2 years after, I was asked to go and get my licensure examinations, and my entire family was repatriated back to the Philippines. Now, it did not matter to me that they also sent 2 British men for me to report to, because at that time, I was not even ready to return to the Philippines, nor was I ready to lead the whole Philippine office, as well as I was not ready at that time to even lead 3 departments. But the opportunity opened to me, and I had to grab it and just do my homework and burn the midnight oil to prepare. I also just realized that I myself was also a very strong sponsor of 2 of our staff. In fact, one of them, who is holding a very senior position now, used to be our pizza waiter. So at the restaurant, I observed his excellent interpersonal skills, and his service to us was impeccable. So I gave him my business card, I hired him, I trained him, I mentored him. And to this day, if you meet him, our clients think that he is a lawyer. So in that sense, I think I was quite fortunate, and I was quite, I was good as a sponsor. So indeed, when done well, I think sponsors and protege wins. In conclusion, I just want to encourage everyone to be deliberate in your plans. You have to personalize your definition of success. And if that definition is being a housewife, then be the best housewife. If the definition, but since we are all here and we are in the workplace, then let us play to win. We always have to seize the opportunity even if you are not ready. A Harvard Business Review study says that men apply for a job even when they are only 60% ready, but women apply when they are 100% ready. When the opportunity presents itself, seize it and just burn the midnight oil to prepare. Thank you.
All right, and our final panelist, we're just getting started, right? And our final panelist, Rana, she's from the Middle East, grew up in the US, now lives in Asia, and so professional expertise aside, which you already heard about, is fairly passionate about the whole idea of advancement from a socioeconomic standpoint professionally as a company, which is what they do, and then at a personal level, how can best practices move from one region to the other, and what are those key takeaways? So maybe, Rana, you could share with us a little bit about your journey, and then the punch list for others.
So thank you very much, Yogesh, and it's very, very nice to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, so it's good to see a lot of people here again. And I just want to comment, I thought what you were saying, Monique, was fabulous. I think it's a fabulous journey for all 3 of these other ladies here. Maybe my story is a little bit more humble. I've been with IFC now since about 1999. When I, graduated from university. I'm curious who else in this panel is from University of Michigan, so that's great. Yeah, so as Yogesh mentioned, I'm originally from the Middle East. I am Jordanian, half Lebanese, and it's certainly a region where you could see a lot more advocacy for women in leadership and women participation in the labor force. And I think they probably could take a lot of lessons from what you see in Asia. So the challenges you find in Asia, you can accentuate that and magnify that, certainly for the region over there. And so that is something that I'm quite passionate about. I've joined an institution that not only works for targeting investing in emerging markets with a clear development objective. So everything we do has to have a clear development objectives. How are we creating jobs? How are we improving the environment? And we have a lot of programs for women. For example, while I'm not directly involved in many of them, but we have a number of programs that are put in place to help women empowerment in the labor force. For example, IFC has invested about 1.6 billion dedicated to gender lens investing through our Women in Banking program. And what that does is help support women entrepreneurs. What we found is we do a lot of lending through financial institution to do SME support, because we find that women often take a large proportion of the SME workforce. And so creating an enabling environment to provide access to finance, to provide access to credit, is one way in which we can help empower women in the labor force. And then going back to sort of my personal experience, so I've been with IFC, which is part of the World Bank Group, as I mentioned, since '99. And just to specifically touch on the sort of mentorship and sponsorship. Again, I'll reiterate that there is a differentiation between the two. Mentors, you'll kind of have somebody that you'll talk to every once in a while, who'll give you feedback, who you can bounce ideas off of. What do you think? Give you a little bit of advice, as opposed to formal coaching, which is somebody that you actually pay or potentially pay money for, where they are professional coaches who give you very deliberate feedback and advice, and somebody you can talk to about very strategic things that you're looking to do with your career or personally. And a sponsor, I would say, is slightly different, and that's where somebody who will, from a career perspective, advocate for you and help you to find those opportunities on a very, very deliberate basis. But it's not necessarily, it's not necessarily somebody that a sponsor, not necessarily somebody who's going to search you out. What I would say is you need to find that sponsor, and you need to advocate for yourself why that person should be your sponsor. You need to deliver projects for that sponsor, special, like these people were saying, stretch assignments for that sponsor, and that sponsor then will be your advocate, whether within the corporation or somewhere outside of the corporation. Many of you probably have read the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, right? So if you read it, who was her sponsor in many ways, and mentor and sponsor was Larry Summers. But how did she get it? She delivered projects for him. She was, I think, worked on projects for him, was a special assistant for him in some capacity, which created an enabling environment for him to sponsor her in her career. So I think there are room for all of those in your career track, but I think you need to be very deliberate about which ones you need and which will service you depending on any given point that you are in your career, and what you are looking to achieve from that relationship.
That's great. So maybe, Rana, I'll piggyback off that idea of being deliberate, right? Of delivering projects so that you can win the credibility and the branding so that people want to sponsor you, right? If I could flow it that way. Perhaps you can talk about, reflecting back on your journey, how the partnership with at home and the partnership in the office environment, right? The networks at home and the networks in the office helped you get there, because today you're running a country for this institution. So how did that pan out for you? And maybe we can go backwards.
Okay. So my experience maybe was a little bit different and I was quite impressed again with Monique, where she said I was never shy to ask for help. I was always very deliberate. I can't say that I followed that same path. So in some sense, I followed a normal career path within IFC. I worked hard, I kept my head down. I said, if I do well, I will be recognized. And I can't say that you have a big hit rate that way. I would have to say you have to be quite deliberate and you have to self-advocate. And for me, that took a little bit of time to kind of realize that self-advocacy is not necessarily me bragging or not necessarily me showing off, but it's me insisting that I be recognized for my work. And I would say that people in management positions, as you're moving up the ladder, or people who are above you who are looking as to whether they're going to give you an opportunity or not are not that stupid either, right? So, but sometimes you're just not immediately in the, on their radar screen. As I think somebody mentioned in the panel before us, that when they were looking to recruit people, it was on networking, is that you may have met somebody who was right for that position, but they just not be immediately on their radar screen. So I think that that sort of networking and self-advocacy puts you back in that radar screen. I think a couple of things that I've done, and so I've had mentors throughout the way, and I would say I've had mentors that were both male, and I've had mentors that were both female. My managers were actually quite supportive, and they were quite critical in my career journey. But I would mention a couple of other people I think were quite instrumental in my life. I would say one is definitely my husband in many ways. He was running a small, smaller than IFC, but a fairly decent-sized company. And he would come home every day, and we would chat about some of the management decisions he would make. And I would think, God, I just don't have the courage to do what he does, and how he talks to people. You know, I mean, he's really, really self-confident. And where can I find that self-confidence? And I guess by osmosis, it ended up I grabbed some of that and was able to apply it in the workforce. And the second one, I would say, interestingly enough, would say my father, right? My father's traditional Middle Eastern male, very dominant, very strong, very intimidating. For me as a child, for my mother as his wife, and for many people who got to know him. And he sat me down one time, and I don't know where it came from, but it stuck with me the rest of my life. And he said, you know, I want you to get an education, and I want you to work, because I don't ever want you to be economically dependent on any man. I want you to be self-sufficient. So in a way, that conversation stuck with me, because I think he knew women from the Middle East are very economically unempowered. And that can be quite a challenge for many of them in their life, whether they decide to join the workforce or not. And I think he wanted to push me so that I was always not just economically empowered, but emotionally, emotionally self-empowered. So interestingly, I would say two big positive influences were the men in my life, as well as, you know, many of the women that I'd worked with.
Yeah, okay. So this is very much the same as your experience. Before coming here, and I did mention to you that I did not, you know, the sponsorship is very foreign to us. And even when I spoke to the power women in the Philippines, it was also something that is foreign to them. And they thought that they did rise through the ladder because of their own merit. But one of the things that they told me was, you do have to be very, very bold. You have to volunteer for the difficult jobs. Do not wait to be voluntold. So volunteer, but do not be voluntold. The other thing is, they said you have to be very deliberate in your plans. You have to know what you want. And again, I go back to having your own definition of success, because through your journey, you will always be bombarded by what success is all about, by that glass ceiling. And do you really want to be there? If you do, then there are certain things that you will have to give up. And it may be giving up your family, it may be giving up your husband. So at the end of the day, you have to know, and you have to keep your feet on the ground to know what your definition of success is, and you always have to go back to that. When I did, in my role models were also the same. It's my sponsor, I always believe, is my husband. So when it was very deliberate again, when I chose my husband or my partner, it was very deliberate that I needed somebody who was much older than I am. So my husband is 9 years older than I am. So he would just let me be. He is not threatened. He is not, and he's very supportive, and he is very confident. So with that, you know, when you go back home and you have a supportive family, I think that makes everything worthwhile than just getting everybody else's applause. But when you get back home, it's just very difficult, right? Second is, you do have to strive for excellence. You cannot be the person that the sponsor will choose if basically you are not ready and you do not have the arsenal of talent and experience that is needed for the job. My father also, when I was growing up, had role models for us. Two women that were very successful, and every day in the breakfast table, it would always be that role model. So, and the same thing, he said, I want you to be independent, financially independent, so that if anything happens, you will be able to fend for yourself.
I'd like to, I guess, add on to Rana's point about that your bosses and your managers are not stupid. Because I think they're not stupid, but sometimes they're too busy. They're too busy to know what you're doing. End of the day, I think results speaks for itself, whether you're a man or woman. If you are delivering very good results, someone who is not stupid should be able to see that. But unfortunately, that person could be too busy to know how much time you've invested into this piece of work. And it would really help if you voice that out. You know, just share. Like I've compared, to do this research piece, I've compared over 200 companies, and these are the key points I found. You know, share your research, you know, talk the person through it so that that person understands how much work has been put into it and gets to know a little bit about your work ethics, what kind of commitment do you put when you are committed and determined to finish a piece of work to perfection. So I think that's the part that's different, because I also have met some of my work colleagues where they said, you know, I've worked for so long on this, but nobody knows that. And I said, yeah, because you didn't tell anyone. How will we know that? We don't keep checking the CCTV to see if you're at work, you know? So these are things that I think you have to be deliberate, but you also, when asking for opportunities, you have to be also deliberate and honest with yourself. Mark your own work, you know, as Monique was sharing, and, you know, Smita was sharing about how when men are asking for work, they're only 60% ready, and women ask for work, they're 100% ready. It's quite common, it's true. I find myself having to, more of the men are coming to me and telling me that, look, I would like to take on this role. This role doesn't exist in your company at the moment, but it's truly needed. But for the women, I tend to ask them, would you like to take on this role? What would you like to grow into? Let me help you get there. But at this moment, sometimes I also find that as an employee, you have to be cautious in marking yourself. Are you ready for what you're asking for? And sometimes it's not very easy for your manager or boss to tell you, look, you're actually not ready. So be honest with yourself, and when you ask for the role, also be honest in sharing, like, look, I'm interested in this role because of these reasons. I may not be ready in these areas, but if you could help me out, I am ready to learn, and I will be ready in 6 months' time if you're willing to support me. So I think when you have that balance, it makes it a lot easier for your manager, your boss, or the one who may become your sponsor to say, yes, I'm willing to take a bet on you, and I'm willing to walk with you through this journey.
So while you started the question with sharing the personal partnerships and the professional, so maybe I'll sort of dwell more where I come from, you know, my sort of bit of personal journey and what I am and why I am the way I am. You know, growing up in India, I would say my role model has always been my father. You know, interestingly, when you're growing up in India, you know, there are a lot of families where, and you know, through the initiative that I'm driving, I'm also seeing, you know, girls and women are not given sort of equal opportunities. But the environment that I come from, even though my father is a self-made man and he came from a very poor background, you know, there was a time where his father, my grandfather, could not even fund his education to all his school, college. Everything was self-funded by him. And not only that, he raised his other siblings, 6 other siblings, and 1 sister to become equally competent in what they were. So we always joke with our father, who's still around. It's like, you know, you were grown up to become a father when you was quite early, so now you should feel like a grandfather to us. But what I learned from him very earlier on is, even though, it was a sort of a model where my father was a bureaucrat working and my mother was a housewife. We were two, girls in the family, and my brother, when he would come home, he would not be the bureaucrat or the government official who was working outside. Irrespective of the fact that, he was working or mom was at home, he would come home and help my mom, where he would cut vegetables. We did not have helpers at home, unlike, what most of us would imagine in India. And he would help cutting the vegetables, and mom would be doing the cooking because 3 of us were there. So I had sort of really big impact of, how my father was and how sort of he was with women and how he was with the other sort of women colleagues when he was working. And I owe it to him. And the other aspect about him was he was uber optimistic. He used to always say, and he still says, that one sort of opportunity, if it sort of knocks you down, there's going to be another door that's going to open up. It's really up to you to see that open door and walk through right across it and find the opportunity that's ahead of you. So yes, growing up in India in such a sort of liberal and open background, and then comes in, so I had the opportunity to go to the best of academic institutions because fortunately I was blessed with some brain. So, I did well in studies, and I managed to get and sort of choose non-traditional mediums. In India, when you're academically bright, you tend to be either a doctor or an engineer. Whereas during my time, there was this Amartya Sen who won the Nobel Prize in economics. And I said, Dad, maybe I should choose economics because that's where I can bring in both the art and science, which I'm sort of good at. Why do I have to choose one? And that's how sort of I went ahead and chose economics and then further sort of business. Now comes in the career journey. Throughout my career, as I had mentioned earlier as well, I was very clear that I wanted to be in technology. And I was very clear as well that I wanted to make a business impact. So while I started with a marketing function, I always was sort of curious. As a child also, I was very sort of curious and restless. I was always told that very curious and wants to have all the questions and get the answers. But my curiosity led me to seek sort of understanding of business as a whole and holistically getting that view. And hence, sort of consciously and deliberately, we talked about it earlier, I made that conscious decision to choose sponsors, mentors and coach that would help me get to that journey. So be it, say, a board member, for some of you who know Mr. Girja Pandey, he sits on the board of a lot of companies, ex-chairman of TCS. He continues to be my mentor and sponsor in certain aspects as well when it comes to certain opportunities. At Finastra, I have a coach, Charlotte. She is the Senior VP of Cultural Transformation, and we meet very frequently and talk about situation-based scenarios where we sort of discuss how we could have handled things differently. And sometimes she even tells me that you were actually absolutely right, so don't overthink and overanalyze, and don't be affected by what others are telling you. In the form of a mentor, my mentor sort of is constantly sort of not just talking about, often we as mentors, and I mentor as well, we think that, okay, mentoring means we have to give critical feedback all the time, and that could be maybe demoralizing to some people. So I always say mentoring is a bit of sort of doing a bit of psychoanalysis of your mentee as well, and tapping into their hidden potential that maybe they are not aware of. And in terms of partnerships, I think I'll conclude with this example where, there was a time when I wanted to sort of venture out and get into consulting, where traditionally my experience was all about running marketing functions and business functions in technology companies. And I said, hey, I love to sort of share experience. I love to see things, as a project and get them to conclusion. So I would love to maybe start a consulting company at some point. And I had no sort of typical consulting background or chartered accountancy sort of background, but one of the 4 consulting firms a few years back reached out to me, and they created a role for me based on my skill sets and experiences rather than offering a role to me that was already existing. Now, while I did not take that role, did not go ahead and I chose Finastra, but that sort of was a positive reinforcement to the fact that when you're networking or when you're having these meaningful conversations, I know a lot has been talked about networking, but if you see them as meaningful conversations, you never know who, where, and when is sort of spotting you, is observing you, and they can see that hidden sort of value that you bring to the table, and they could offer you that something that even you wouldn't have thought of.
That's great. Questions from the audience, because I can go on and Pranav over there is flashing me. Questions from the audience. Okay, while people, oh, go ahead. There's a question in the front. While a mic gets there, one last question that, after we're done with this one, if we could do a quick round robin on women helping women. Does that happen? Does that not happen? And what's the trick to that? Let's get a little prescriptive. Go ahead.
Yep. So women tend to be over-mentored and under-sponsored. I think we have heard this before. And it's like everywhere we look for their mentors available, and they are ready to be mentored. But when it comes to sponsorship, it's very hard to find that sponsor who's ready to put their stake and say, yeah, I'm ready to sponsor this person. And often sponsorship happens inside the doors and not known to many people, but mentorship happens with everybody. So, means what's the difference with how do we find a sponsor? I think that's a struggle very often.
Maybe I'll take that, considering I've had experience having a mentor and mentoring as well. I think over-mentoring depends on if you have chosen a mentor or you've been given a mentor as part of the organizational training or based on where you are. If you're choosing a mentor, you can choose a mentor based on, the shared values that you have. So it could be a woman or a male mentor based on the values that you sort of see, shared value system and career aspirations. So you have to be very clear in terms of what's the goalpost you want to hit and then work backwards in terms of whether this mentor has the experience and skill sets. So while they are assessing you have to be assessing your mentor as well, where you have to see whether they can give you the skill sets and experience that you need to get to your end goal post. Talking about Spencer again, we'll reiterate that sponsor is someone who's your advocate, your champion, and your influencer. They're not someone you would be talking to on a daily basis or even a monthly basis. Again, it's up to you how you choose your sponsor. And talking from my own sort of example, few weeks back, I was sitting down and laying down my 1 year, 3 year, 5 year goals. So I'm very sort of goal-oriented and methodical. I like to see the picture where I want to head to and then work backwards, just like we sort of heard in the previous session as well. Now, I realized that for my first year journey, I spotted that there is a specific person who can get me there, what I'm looking at. So hence, I identified a sponsor based on the skill sets or the opportunities I needed. For the 3 year or 5 year goal that I had, it was someone who was at a different sort of power position and who has sort of the authority to be able to give me those stretch assignments and be able to get me to that level as well.
But maybe I'll just jump in, but I think also just building on that, you have to find, I don't think there's a problem in having too many mentors, so you have to find the ones that are bringing you value. And I would probably say that many of men and where I work, they have many mentors, but maybe they just define it differently, like somebody they just sit and chat with, but that can also be a mentor in a way. Then if lack of sponsors, that's where you kind of have to jump in and be much more of your own self-advocate. And I'll touch on something I mentioned earlier. Not everybody is a type A plus personality. Not everybody is an extreme extrovert, right? For some people, it's very natural, and it's really not a problem to go up to somebody and say, I want to, do X, Y, Z project. I want to do this. Other people, and maybe women, maybe fall into that spectrum where they say, I have to be 100% sure before I say I want to do this and that. And I think that's where maybe that gap in that sponsorship comes in, because again, being on the radar screen of somebody and pushing and self-advocating and demonstrating sort of your desire to do something can give women that link into that sponsorship, you know, and into finding more of those sponsorships. And I would say that even if you ask for something and you don't necessarily get it, again, it puts you on the radar screen and it starts making people think about you. And then from there, sponsorship will organically come up. And so I know when I transitioned into management roles, it's so striking, the differentiation between how men will come and talk to you and self-advocate and how women will. And, as I think as Rhonda was saying, you have to, good managers will be able to identify the difference, but sometimes they just don't see it. They just have to be informed of it, and then you can see the value that each employee brings in, and then you can help to advocate for them or push them.
I just wanted to share this this incident that happened. So I came from the Philippines. My first job was with Jones Lang LaSalle in Hong Kong, right? And the way I was raised up was, first, you don't speak when you are not spoken to. Number two, you don't enter into a conversation if you are not in the conversation. So that was how I was raised. Now I go to Hong Kong, and I was a research analyst. I was working with a powerhouse of men. I was actually the only female research analyst at the time, and all of them were all from Ivy League schools, and I was from the Philippine school. I was seated beside my Australian boss, and right in front of me was my Australian colleague. Our British chairman came over to the office and asked a question to my British boss. So here I was just typing and not getting into the conversation. My Australian boss was not able to answer. He was like, okay, I'll get back to you. My Australian colleague pivoted and just entered the conversation and answered the question. So initially, our chairman just looked at him with a face like, why are you in this conversation? I don't even know you. But because he had something to say, the conversation became three-way. Our chairman pivoted towards him, and the conversation became three-way conversation. When that was happening, I was just observing, and I said, no, you cannot answer. I thought he made a mistake. I said, no, you cannot do this. And I did see the face of our chairman. But because he had something to say, then I said, yes, now you have to do this. And he was recognized, and his name was even, the chairman already knew his name. And I would see them walking to the elevator together and having a conversation. So immediately I told myself, okay, I have to also, what I grew up with, the usual is very different once you are in the workplace. You do have to speak up, and there are certain things that you will have to be very flexible. So.
Were you saying that some mentors you have don't support you all the way through?
No. I wasn't saying that. I was saying that women tend to be over-mentored and under-sponsored. That's what I was saying, that we're always getting mentored, but really it's hard to find a sponsor who's ready to sponsor and say, okay, I'm ready to take that risk.
Have you asked people and then they said, like, I'm not going to sponsor you? No. So I think you have to ask. People rarely just come up to you and say, hey, I'm going to sponsor you, I'm going to talk about you, advocate for you. I think you can ask them, but if you ask someone and that person does not want to support you, I've met people like that. In terms of when I'm fundraising, I've met investors who don't want to invest in my company. And it's a very difficult question to ask or a difficult conversation to have, but I always ask them, why? And I think you have to give room for people to be honest, because usually they'll give you very superficial reasons, like, so why don't you, what makes you not want to invest? What makes you hesitate? And then they'll say something like, oh, it's a great company, it just doesn't fit our portfolio at the moment. So that's not the real reason. Yeah. So then you have to open up and just say that it's okay that you don't invest. I just want to know your real reason so that I can be better the next time you see me. So that's when the real reasons come out. And you have to really genuinely accept it, not like defensive, just accept it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate this feedback. And I think that's the way you know, and that's the way I knew. And that's how the next time I go back to the next investor, I become better and better and better. And one day someone will say, yes, I will sponsor you.
Great. I'll just round out with a male perspective on that question, because the idea that you are over-mentored suggests that men don't get as much mentorship, or somehow in relation to some other demographic, right? My personal experience has been more like Rana's, right? Where you put your head down, keep delivering, and every 2 years or so, the organization is savvy enough, right, like Sokhui was saying, to realize that that need can be solved by this person, and over time, you get a reputation, right? And while I was getting mentored, there are 1 or 2 executives in my life who've kind of been constant, and for the longest time, I thought that they were extremely selfish, because what they did was, as they grew in the organization, they threw me to the wolves, right? And go solve this challenging role, and go to Singapore and fix this problem, right? But over time, what happens is, behind the scenes, as people get to know your work, and that goes back to the essence of networking, right? The sponsorship happens. Your credibility wins you that sponsorship, right? Unlike the joy of having a startup and having an investor tell you point blank why they don't want to invest in you, in an organization, especially larger organization, political correctness actually inhibits candid feedback, especially in the US, right? It's hard. And then that, coupled with the fact that not everyone has the thick skin to deal with that constructive feedback, right, is also a problem, right? One of my mentors, actually both of them, right, would say, don't bring knives to a gunfight. I'm like, what is that all about, right? And really what it is about is that you're not bringing your A game, right? You aren't ready for this space, right? And that was constructive feedback. I had to go figure out how to do a better job on that project to deliver that. My point, just to wrap up, going back to where we started, mentorship, sponsorship, this is a responsibility, right? There is no one size fits all, right? While all of you might be women, right? The answer for what is success is different for every human, right? When I became executive, people started inviting me to speak at events because they thought I was suddenly successful, right? I moved laterally, from the US to Singapore because I actually want to be an engaged father. Singapore is a better place for my 2 girls to grow up, right? It's challenging in this organization where the temptation for career progression is to move back and to move my family around, to say, no, I need your support. And as it turns out, our CFO is a classmate of Arvind's, right? So the organizer of this conference, he's empathetic enough to kind of give me 2 jobs so that it can make economic sense to afford me in this role in Singapore for longer than I was planning, right? So all of that to say that men don't necessarily have it easy, right? But absolutely, you can help yourself by being more deliberate, more purposeful, because that will help you find your ikigai, right? And then, as far as networking is concerned, talking to people just generally helps. Don't turn everything into a relationship. Having conversations helps. You will learn something. Listening, right? That advice that you were given, listening can only help. Being the last person in the room to talk is not a bad thing. Just ensure that if you have something to say, you say it, right? With that, thank you so much.